When the first bullet was fired, the world believed it understood war. But what arrived at dawn was something no one was prepared for. A battlefield where enemies stood side by side in silence. A sky that carried a warning instead of fire. And a single decision that could change the fate of nations. This is a story of a war that paused, not because peace was found, but because something far greater was coming. The morning sky was stained with smoke long before the sun rose. A reddish haze hung across the eastern horizon, like the world itself had been scorched during the night. Lieutenant Aaron Hale stood at the edge of the ruined bridge, his boots pressed into shattered concrete and dust. The river beneath him moved slowly, carrying pieces of broken wood, fragments of homes, and something darker that he refused to name aloud. The air carried the scent of burning fuel and damp earth. Children had once played not far from this place. Their laughter had once filled the streets that now lay silent and broken, where it crawled in like a slow-moving fog, swallowing familiar sounds one by one, leaving only the echo of distant shells. Aaron closed his eyes for a moment, reaching for the memory of peace. He could still remember the soft rustling of leaves from his home in Montana, the quiet rhythm of life before orders, before deployment, before everything changed. But memory could not soften the weight he carried now. The world had shifted, and the United States had stepped in. He opened his eyes as the rumble of engines approached behind him. Armored vehicles, bearing the flag he had sworn to protect, rolled forward with heavy determination. Their metal frames gleamed faintly beneath the rising sun, as if morning light had chosen to reveal their purpose with cruel clarity. Standing beside him was Captain Mara Voss, her face carved with resolve. She was known for her calm under fire, and yet, even now, the tension in her shoulders showed the pressure of the moment. She spoke without turning her head. They attacked 3 villages last night. The reports are still coming in. Her voice was steady, but the words landed like stones. Aaron nodded. Everyone already knew what came next. Everyone understood why their boots were here. Yet knowing did not make the burden any lighter. A group of displaced civilians began crossing what remained of the bridge, mothers holding their children close, elderly men moving slowly, staring with hollow exhaustion, young boys with faces much too serious for their age. They passed Aaron and Mara as though passing through a doorway between worlds. One of the children paused. A girl no older than 7, wearing a pale yellow dress streaked with dust. Her eyes were dark and wide, searching Aaron's face, studying him carefully, as if deciding whether soldiers were protectors or shadows. He knelt to meet her gaze. "You are safe to cross," he said quietly. She did not respond, but she nodded, a small gesture, a fragile trust. Mara watched the exchange with quiet thought. "Every time," she murmured, her voice low, "I wonder how many more children will look at us like that before this ends." Aaron exhaled slowly. There was no answer. A radio crackled. Urgent, sharp, unmistakable. "Command Echo Unit. You are to advance towards Sector 4. Hostile presence confirmed. Civilians in immediate danger." Mara stiffened, jaw tightening. Aaron felt his heartbeat quicken, not from fear, but from the weight of decision. Sector 4 was a place the enemy held tightly. To move forward meant confrontation. To delay meant lives lost. The dawn light continued to climb, revealing more of the smoke-filled valley below. The sky above was brightening, yet the world beneath it darkened. Mara turned to Aaron, her expression firm and unflinching. "We move." He met her gaze and nodded once. No speeches, no declarations, only purpose. The unit formed up. Metal clanked. Footsteps aligned. The sound of readiness filled the air. Aaron took one last glance at the retreating line of civilians. The girl in the yellow dress looked back once more. Her eyes were quieter now, but still searching. He wondered what she would remember of this day. He wondered what history would say of this moment, when a nation known for power stepped into a war that would reshape everything. He wondered how many dawns would arrive before peace returned. He lifted his rifle. The command signal came. They advanced, and the world held its breath. The road that stretched ahead was narrow and uneven, carved between hills that had once been green. Now, Charred soil and blackened tree trunks lined the path like gravestones. The rising sun cast long shadows across the landscape, making every ruined wall and shattered window appear like silent witnesses to what lay ahead. Aaron moved in step with the unit, his breathing steady, his senses sharpened. The sound of boots, the low hum of engines, and the distant echo of artillery formed a rhythm that pulsed through the morning air. Yet beneath all of it, there was a silence that felt unnatural, as if the land itself waited. Captain Mara walked just ahead of him. Her voice came through the calms with quiet precision as she issued orders. Maintain formation. Eyes sharp on the ridgelines. Expect movement. They entered the outskirts of Sector 4. Houses stood roofless and burned from the inside. The wind carried the faint smell of gunpowder and smoke. A metal swing in an abandoned yard swayed gently. No laughter, no voices, only emptiness. Sergeant Blake, a towering man with a deep-set gaze, paused beside a fallen fence. He crouched, examining footprints in the dirt. Recent, he said, his tone heavy. Someone rushed through here. Many of them. The tension thickened. Aaron scanned the street. Shattered glass glittered like frozen tears across the ground. A toppled market cart lay on its side, the fruit crushed and rotting. Life had fled, but traces of it trembled in every corner, like ghosts still whispering. A call came through the radio. We have movement near the eastern block. Unknown count. Mara raised her fist. The unit lowered, taking defensive positions along the walls. Aaron crouched behind a broken wall, metal scratching beneath his gloves. He steadied his rifle. His pulse slowed. His eyes narrowed. Then he saw them. Figures emerging from the alley ahead. Not soldiers. Civilians. Men, women, and several children. Their clothes were torn. Faces pale with exhaustion. Eyes reflecting fear that had gone beyond crying. Mara rose slowly, signaling the others to hold fire. She stepped forward with careful intent. You are safe, she called to them. We will escort you to the evacuation route. But the group did not move. They looked behind them, as if something followed. Aaron saw it in their expressions first. An unspoken terror, a silent plea. Then the sound came, not loud, not sudden, a low, distant echo, like metal dragged across stone, growing closer. The civilians froze. One boy clutched his mother's hand with desperate intensity. His small chest rose and fell too quickly. His eyes were locked on the far end of the street. Aaron followed his gaze. A figure stepped into view. Then another, and another. Enemy soldiers moved with calculated precision, their expressions cold, their weapons raised. They did not shout. They did not rush. They simply advanced, as if this confrontation had been planned long before the Americans arrived. Mara raised her voice, firm and controlled. Echo unit, hold position. Do not fire unless ordered. But the enemy kept coming. The wind swept across the street, carrying dust between the two sides. For a moment, the world felt unbearably still, like a scale poised atip. Aaron's grip tightened. He felt the eyes of the girl in the yellow dress in his memory. That fragile trust placed silently into his hands. He could not fail it. The enemy commander stepped forward, his boots deliberate upon the broken ground. His face held no anger, only certainty. He raised his hand. Mara's voice rang through the comms. Prepare to engage. Aaron inhaled deeply, the world narrowing into a tunnel of breath, pulse, and purpose. Yet before a single shot was fired, something else happened. A sound thundered across the sky, a deep roar that shook the air itself. Everyone, both sides, lifted their eyes. A formation of aircraft soared overhead. The insignia was unmistakable. Reinforcements. But their trajectory was wrong. They were not passing. They were descending. Mara's expression changed. Not relief, not triumph. Something else. Something uncertain. Aaron felt the ground tremble beneath his feet as dust rose in swirling clouds. The civilians stared upward, their faces illuminated by the growing light. The enemy's soldiers paused, momentarily frozen. The world was suspended in a single, breathless moment. No one moved. No one spoke. And what happened next had the power to shift everything. But the moment stretched, held, waiting for the first irreversible decision. The aircraft descended slowly, as though the sky itself was being pulled down toward the earth. The roar of their engines rolled across the valley and echoed against the ruined buildings. Dust lifted from the ground in swirling spirals, drifting around the soldiers and civilians alike. Yet no one moved. Aaron's heartbeat grew louder in his ears. Not fast, but steady, a deep, deliberate beat like a war drum. He watched the aircraft formation lower its wings, circling above the abandoned district as if surveying every broken street, every shadow, every possibility. Captain Mara's voice came through the comm, quiet but sharp. Hold positions. We do not fire unless they engage. But the uncertainty in her voice was unmistakable. These aircraft were American. Their hulls bore the same markings as the vehicles behind them, yet the pattern of their approach was unfamiliar. Not standard reinforcement, not evacuation support. Something else. Something that command had not told them. The enemy soldiers lowered their weapons slightly, eyes narrowing at the sky. They were confused, too. For a moment, war itself felt hesitant. The civilians stood motionless, caught between two forces and the unknown descending from above. The little boy held his mother's dress, so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. One of the older men stared up with a look that suggested he had seen too many wars to trust anything anymore. Aaron adjusted his stance and stepped slightly forward, keeping his weapon angled down but ready. His eyes traced the aircraft's movement. The engines hummed with the sound of power restrained. Then a voice crackled through the radio. But it was not the voice of their command. It was someone else entirely. Echo unit. Remain where you are. Do not advance. New operational directive is in effect. Mara stiffened. Her eyes narrowed. This is Captain Marvos. Identify yourself. Static, then silence. The aircraft shifted formation again, trailing shadows across the ground. Their descent slowed. Their engines softened into a low mechanical hum. They were waiting, as if expecting someone to make the first move. Aaron felt the weight of choice settling on his shoulders. Every instinct told him that something had changed. Something deep. Something not written in the mission brief. He glanced at Mara. She was standing perfectly still. Her jaw was locked, her eyes analyzing every detail, every motion, every possibility. The enemy commander lowered his weapon and stepped forward. He did not raise his hands in surrender. He did not speak. He simply looked at Mara with the expression of a man who knew what silence could mean. And he waited too. The aircraft above shifted again. One broke away from the formation and began lowering directly toward the ground. Landing gear unlocking with a heavy metallic click that echoed through the hollow streets. The civilians instinctively backed away. Some covered their faces. Others watched, their breaths held in their throats. Aaron's eyes stayed fixed on the aircraft door as it began to open. A ramp lowered slowly, releasing a burst of warm engine air across the street. The dust thickened. The outlines of figures began to appear inside. Not soldiers ready to fight. Not medics ready to aid. Not officials ready to speak. But something else. Something that did not match the moment. Something that did not match any expectation of war. Aaron felt his chest tighten. Mara's hand hovered near her weapon. The enemy soldiers shifted their stance, uncertain whether to prepare or to watch. The civilians stared, some with fear, others with fragile hope. Aaron's pulse held. One figure stepped into the light at the top of the ramp. And then, the radio burst to life again. Stand by for immediate strategic correction. Every eye locked forward. The dust swirled. The figure paused. The world waited for the next breath, the next word, the next irreversible action. But none came. Not yet. Not here. Not while the dawn still held its final silence. The figure stood motionless at the top of the ramp, outlined by the rising sun behind him. The light made it impossible to see his face clearly. Only the shape of his uniform, the straightness of his posture, the way his presence seemed to draw the air tight around him. No one spoke. Even the engine noise felt quieter now, as if listening. The dust settled slowly, revealing more of the man's features. He stepped forward, boots hitting the metal ramp with a slow, deliberate rhythm. One step, another, the kind of steps taken by someone who already knew that the world would listen when he arrived. Aaron watched the civilians. Their eyes followed the man with a mix of fear, hope, and something harder to describe. A recognition that this moment would decide something, even if no one knew what. Captain Mara's voice was low, steady, barely above a breath. Hold your positions. But Aaron could hear the tension beneath her calm. She was ready to speak, to command, to act if she had to, yet she waited. The enemy commander did not move either. His soldiers stayed rigid, frozen between instinct and uncertainty. This was no ordinary encounter. Everyone felt that. The man reached the base of the ramp. He walked forward, the dust lifting at his steps like the ground reacted to him. His uniform carried no rank insignia, no division patches, just a flag. The silence of the street thickened. He stopped at equal distance between Mara's unit and the enemy soldiers, a place where the land still held the memory of fire. Aaron could finally see his face, stern, sharpened by years of decisions made in rooms without sunlight. Not a soldier from a field, someone from higher, someone who rarely stepped into the smoke themselves. He spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the ruins as if the walls themselves repeated it. Stand down. All forces. This conflict is under new directive. Mara's eyes widened by only the smallest fraction. Not confusion. Recognition. You, she said, her voice steady but heavy in meaning. The man nodded once. Orders come directly from the highest level. The situation has changed. The enemy commander stepped forward, just one step. What change? He asked. No hostility, only caution. The wind moved to the broken street, like a whisper of something forgotten. The man looked at him without emotion. There is no war here today. Silence fell deeper. Mara's breath tightened. Her fingers curled slowly near her weapon. The enemy's soldiers braced, unsure if this was peace or a trap. Civilians watched with eyes too large, too tired, too desperate to believe anything easily. Aaron felt something shift within him. Not relief, not fear, something colder. Something that came when decisions were made far above the ground he stood on. He took a step forward. Explain, he said quietly. The man turned his gaze to him. No anger, no friendliness. Only a calm that felt sharper than any blade. That will be addressed when the time for explanation arrives. The answer was deliberate, measured, empty of clarity. Mara stepped closer, her gaze firm. Soldiers did not stand down in the middle of enemy territory without reason. You are asking us to hold with civilians in immediate proximity and hostile forces positioned to strike. This directive requires justification. The man lifted his chin slightly, not in challenge, but finality. Your orders are to wait. The enemy commander spoke again, the edge in his voice rising. This is no neutral ground. The man looked at him. You will wait as well. A stalemate held in the air, more dangerous than any firefight. No one lifted a weapon, yet the threat pulsed from every heartbeat. Aaron felt time slow. The aircraft above held position, engines humming like distant thunder. The sun climbed higher, its rays catching on broken glass and metal debris, making the street shimmer like something fragile and dangerous. The civilians stood between forces, breath shallow, unsure if this was salvation or something else entirely. A child began to cry softly, the sound thin and trembling. His mother hushed him gently, her eyes never leaving the three figures in the center of the street. Aaron's hand tightened around his rifle. The man in the unmarked uniform lifted his eyes to the sky, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then he spoke again, his voice lower this time. Something is coming. The kind of shift that does not begin with bullets, but with moments like this one. Mara's expression changed. Not fear, understanding. The enemy commander's jaw tightened. Aaron's chest felt heavier. The air did not move. No one spoke. And the world waited for what was about to break open. The world did not breathe. Not the sky, not the earth, not the broken shells of buildings standing like silent sentinels. It was as if reality itself had paused, waiting for one motion, one word, one trigger that would shape everything that followed. The man in the unmarked uniform stood at the center of it all, a still point around which tension circled like a tightening storm. His eyes did not reveal fear or urgency, but something deeper, a knowledge that only those who stood far above the battlefield ever possessed. Mara stepped closer, not aggressive, but deliberate, her boots pressed softly into the dust, her shadow stretching across broken ground. "You say something is coming," she said. "Then tell us what it is." The man did not look at her. He looked forward, past the civilians, past the enemy soldiers, past the destroyed houses and the rising smoke, as if he was watching something none of them could yet see. "War is not about the battles you fight," he said. "It is about the battles that arrive before you are ready to understand them." The civilians listened. The children did not cry now. Even they felt the pull of a moment heavier than bullets. The enemy commander's grip on his weapon tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "You speak in riddles. This land is already burned. What more is there to understand?" The man's eyes shifted to him. "You have seen only the first spark of what is beginning." Aaron felt something cold settle beneath his ribs, like the world horizon had shifted an inch farther away. He looked at the skies, nothing but clouds thinning in the sun. Yet something in the air felt changed, stretched, waiting. The aircraft engines rumbled overhead, not moving, not leaving, not acting, just waiting. The kind of waiting that comes before the ground breaks open. Mara lowered her voice. "What are we waiting for?" The man finally answered without hesitation. "Confirmation." The word struck the air like steel. The enemy commander drew in a slow breath, no longer calm, but aware. "You mean decision." The man did not deny it. Aaron's pulse deepened. He looked to the civilians. Faces hollow, eyes searching for meaning, for direction, for something to hold. One of the older women clutched her scarf tightly, whispering something under her breath. A prayer or a memory. They were the same in times like this. Mara stepped forward again. "We cannot hold civilians in the open like this. They must be moved to shelter." The man responded immediately. "No one moves until the next transmission." Her jaw tightened with controlled frustration. Her voice remained sharp but steady. "If you wanted control, you could have arrived sooner." The man's eyes shifted to her at last. "I arrived at the only moment that mattered." The enemy commander lifted his chin slightly, anger threading beneath restraint. "And what happens when the next moment arrives?" The man did not answer him, not with words. A distant sound began to rise instead, a low vibration, subtle at first, like a quiet tremor beneath the earth, a shift of air. The dust on the ground trembled softly. Aaron felt the hairs on his arms rise. His vision sharpened, his breath deepened. Mara looked toward the horizon. The enemy soldiers angled their weapons without aiming, uncertain. The civilians backed closer together, instinct pulling them toward the nearest source of protection. The man in the unmarked uniform simply watched the distance, as if confirming what he already knew. The vibration grew. Not aircraft, not vehicles, something else. The kind of sound that did not come from machines or engines, a sound like the sky preparing to tear. Mara touched her comm, eyes locked forward. Echo unit. Aaron did not wait for her command. His instincts had already decided. He shifted his stance, lifted his rifle, focused his breath. The enemy's soldiers mirrored him. The civilians crouched. The ground settled. The horizon flickered. The sound grew. And then the transmission finally came through the radio. But it was not a voice. It was a signal, a single tone, steady, unbroken, rising. Everything and everyone froze, waiting for the meaning that had not yet been spoken, waiting for the moment that would not arrive quickly, waiting for what was already approaching. The tone in the radio continued, long and unwavering, like a hell breath stretching across the battlefield. It felt less like a message and more like a warning, or a signal that something already set in motion had reached the edge of revelation. The vibration in the ground grew stronger, not shaking, not violent, a steady pulse, as though the earth beneath their boots was remembering something older than war, older than nations, older than the men holding weapons on opposite sides of the shattered street. Aaron adjusted his grip, keeping his stance firm. He scanned the horizon, searching for the source of the sound. There were no vehicles, no enemy reinforcements, no visible threat, yet the air felt charged. He could taste metal at the back of his tongue, a sign of change, of something moving beneath the ordinary senses. The man in the unmarked uniform stood perfectly still, watching the horizon as though it had already spoken to him. Mara lowered her voice, speaking directly to him now. The civilians cannot hold through whatever this is. Tell us what comes next. The man did not look at her. The moment will reveal itself. His calm was not reassurance. It was a quiet certainty that carried weight like stone. The enemy commander narrowed his eyes. You speak of moments while people stand between life and death. If your intention is delay, you will not succeed in holding both sides still. The man turned his gaze to him. If either side moves now, both lose everything. Silence followed, and the silence held truth. Even the enemy's soldiers understood it. They did not lower their rifles, but their fingers loosened from the triggers. Not trust, calculation. The civilians remained huddled, some kneeling, some standing, their eyes wide and unblinking. One woman clutched a photograph against her chest, her hands trembling. Aaron stepped slightly closer to Mara, keeping his voice low. This is not a tactical standoff. He is holding the field in place for something larger. Mara's eyes did not leave the man. He is waiting for permission. The vibration in the earth shifted. Not stronger. Different, like a rhythm carried through stone. The aircraft overhead adjusted their formation, not descending now, not retreating, just repositioning in a slow, deliberate arc. Aaron felt his breath deepen again. Every instinct inside him sharpened to a thin edge. His pulse was steady, controlled, but the world around him felt as though it was balancing on the edge of something unseen. Then the enemy commander did something unexpected. He lowered his weapon completely. Not surrender, recognition. He understood, too. He stepped forward one more pace, his voice steady. If something is coming, then say what role we hold in this moment. The man in the unmarked uniform spoke, without turning his head. Your role is to remain alive. Those words fell heavy. Simple, undeniable, without comfort. Mara exhaled slowly, a breath measured with discipline. Then tell us why we are being held in stillness. The man's expression did not change. You are waiting for another arrival. Aaron felt his body tense, not from fear, from anticipation. The kind of anticipation that rises when events are no longer controlled by soldiers on the ground. The civilians listened with the silent desperation of those who have lost the luxury of understanding. The enemy's soldiers watched the sky. The aircraft continued their steady arc. And then the radio tone stopped. Just stopped. Cleanly. Without fade. Without transition. The silence that followed felt immense. The man lifted his chin, slightly, like someone acknowledging the arrival of the moment he had been measuring. It begins now, he said softly. Mara shifted her stance. The enemy commander straightened. Aaron lowered his weight into his heels, weapon steady, breath deep, and before another word could be spoken, a second sound entered the air. Not thunder, not engines, not explosions. Something else, carried from far beyond the hills. A sound like thousands of voices speaking at once. Too distant to understand, too vast to ignore. It rolled across the valley in a slow, rising wave, heavy and deep, like the beginning of a storm whose shape could not yet be seen. The civilians clung to one another. The soldiers of both sides held still, united only by the gravity of the unknown. The man in the unmarked uniform did not move. Aaron's pulse thudded once, hard. The enemy commander's eyes locked on the horizon. Mara's hand hovered near her calm. The sound grew, and grew, and grew, but what it carried and what it would bring had not yet revealed itself. Ending episode. The sound rose until it filled the sky, spreading over the shattered town like a tide of unseen force. It was not a roar and not a chant. It was something deeper, something that pulled at memory, instinct, and a quiet place inside every person where fear and hope overlapped. Aaron stood motionless, breath steady, as the horizon began to shift, not with troops, not with machines, but with movement farther than sight, like shadows gathering beyond the edge of vision. Mara's voice came through the calm but quiet now. Hold steady. For the first time since the war began, her words did not sound like command. They sounded like preparation. The civilians did not cry. They did not panic. They simply watched. The enemy commander lowered his gaze, as if acknowledging something inevitable. The man in the unmarked uniform finally turned, looking at Aaron directly. "You will remember this moment," he said, "because this is the moment where war stopped being something fought on the ground." Aaron did not answer. He only held the man's gaze, steady and unflinching. The sound in the sky rose to its peak. Then it stopped, not slowly, not fading, just gone. The silence that followed was deeper than any that had come before. No gun raised. No voice broke. No engine roared. The air felt untouched, as if the world itself was waiting to decide what it would become next. The man in the unmarked uniform stepped back toward the aircraft. He did not salute. He did not explain. He simply offered a final set of words that settled like stone. "Prepare yourselves. The world is changing, and you'll decide how." Mara watched him return to the ramp, her expression unreadable. The enemy commander watched too, no longer an opponent, but a witness. The civilians remained still, their future suspended in the balance of what they had heard, but not yet understood. Aaron lowered his weapon, not in surrender, not in relief, in acceptance. The aircraft lifted, engines rising again into that steady, controlled thunder. The formation circled once overhead, then banked toward the horizon, disappearing into the light of a new morning. No orders followed. No battles resumed. No voices replaced the silence. Both sides simply stood, facing one another, not enemies, not allies, just human beings standing beneath a sky that held more than any of them yet understood. The wind swept through the street, carrying the dust gently toward the river, the same river that had carried broken fragments of the world only hours before. Aaron felt the weight in his chest shift, not lifted, not gone, just changed. Mara turned to her unit, her voice soft. "We move the civilians to safety. For now, this ground is quiet." The enemy commander nodded once, a gesture of respect without truce. His men stepped back, moving toward their side of the ruined town. No shot was fired. No orders were shouted. Only footsteps. Human footsteps. Aaron looked up at the sky, now calm and wide and impossibly open. War had paused. Not ended. Not resolved. Paused, waiting for the next decision. He did not know when the signal would return. He did not know what the sound had meant. He only knew that when the world changed, they would all feel it. He exhaled slowly. The dawn finally broke fully, sunlight touching the earth, and the story of what began here would continue.